So, I'm here today with Professor Oscar Chase, who is a professor at New York University. He teaches civil procedural law and comparative law. And he gave me the honor of asking him two questions, being one of them about the book he wrote recently, which is very interesting, really brilliant. And I'm going to ask him to say shortly which would be the main ideas of this wonderful book.
Well, thank you, first of all, for being so kind about my book. And I'm always happy to talk about it. The main idea of the book is that law, and in particular procedural law, is in important ways comes from the culture in which the country uses it. As for example, in the United States, there are particular kinds of culture which are in slight ways different from, say, Brazil or in Europe, but the ideas that I think are important and have always been important in the United States is individualism and anti-government in certain ways, and righteousness, egalitarian. And I think procedure in the United States, just as an example, are affected by that. Just one example would be the jury, which many countries have juries for criminal cases, but not for civil cases. And many of my legal friends say that it's a very odd thing. Mm-hmm. But I think, as an example of the book, is that the jury is ordinary people who have an opportunity to decide important issues of law. And in that sense, it is individualism, mm-hmm. in the sense that each person has a vote, whether, if you're in the jury, whether you're rich, poor, or anything else. And also it is a way of showing that there is a democracy within the law that in other ways would not. So I think the main, without going into more details, it is, the idea is that, and many people overlook this, that culture, by which I mean how people think, or how they decide what really is, how they decide whether or not righteousness is being done. All of these things that can come up, and in different ways, in different countries. So that's a quick answer, I hope helpful.
Very good. And in this context, Professor James, what would you say about mediation? Do you feel it? Do you think it's very effective? It does work in American society to solve, as a tool to solve disputes?
In my view, yes. I think mediation is a helpful way to deal with people who are against each other in some kind of litigation or law school or lawyer. It can be anything like some commercial, or it could be about man and woman, that sort of thing. So I find that, of course, mediation cannot resolve all. But I have seen in my own practice and so forth where important lawyers and with substantial money have not been able to get a result from the court because it takes so long. But when they sit down, and with a mediator, a neutral person who listens to both, who makes ideas, who helps them both, is often, and I've seen that happen, where they come to an agreement that they couldn't otherwise. And mediation is also important and helpful in very small disputes. For example, someone who's has just a disagreement with some, like a cleaner. Oh, you ruined my suit, and then going on to that, and going into small case court, and they have a mediation, and it's often very helpful. Low cost, low time. Of course, we could say more of it, but that's a give you. Now, let me say a little bit about connecting it to the book, which you mentioned, and that is the development of mediation as an important part in the United States grew out of, first of all, there were too many cases, the courts couldn't get them, and so forth. That's not so much a culture problem. That's a important issue, but not deep. But what I have noticed is over the last, say, 4 decades, the American situation has been more and more against governmental interest, government control. And one of the ways that is dealt with is mediation, because in mediation, it's not a judge that says, it's not a president that says, it's the people themselves.
Very good.
Is a kind of cultural matter. And one other point about it was it grew out greatly in what I would call flower power. What was that? The days of the Beatles and so forth and so on. And people said, we don't want these instructions. We want to work it ourselves. And one of the things that came out of that was mediation. So there's an example of how culture and procedural law can be connected. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Essa foi